He wouldn't stop digging, not even when his paws began to bleed. Not even when Evelyn's voice broke, calling his name into the cold mountain wind. Cooper had always listened, always. But not this time. The old Labrador mix clawed at the muddy slope with a desperate focus Evelyn had never seen before. Snowmelt had softened the edge of the gulch just beyond the cedar fence line, and now Cooper was digging like his soul depended on it. The earth trembled beneath him, sloughing away in wet chunks. His breath came hard and ragged. Then he stopped. His ears pricked, tail rigid, his head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. Evelyn held her breath. A sound, so faint she might have imagined it. A cry, thin, muffled, broken by earth and water. Her heart dropped into her stomach. Cooper let out a low, trembling howl, then returned to digging furiously. Evelyn stumbled down the slope, the loose mud sucking at her boots. "Cooper, what is it? What are you?" He looked at her, eyes wide with something close to pleading. Then his paw struck something soft. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside him. Her jeans were instantly soaked through. She pushed aside handfuls of mud, trembling. Her fingers found fur, wet, cold. She pulled gently. It was small, limp. A kitten? No, not a house cat. Its ears were tufted. The markings were wild. A bobcat, barely the size of a potato, covered in grit and lifeless mud. "Oh God," Evelyn whispered. She held the creature in both hands. It was shockingly cold. Its tiny ribs barely lifted. A breath, a shallow whisper of life. Cooper stood beside her, trembling but still, his eyes locked on hers, as if to say, "There's more." Then he turned and began digging again. Evelyn clutched the tiny body to her chest. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She blinked, and for a split second, she saw another moment from years ago. Snow falling outside the hospital, a nurse placing something small and still into her arms, her husband's hand on her back. The vision vanished with the wind. Cooper barked once, sharp, urgent. Evelyn turned. He was standing over another mound of wet earth. Another one? She tucked the first kitten into the inner fold of her jacket, just over her heart, and crawled toward Cooper, the mountain air stinging her eyes. She didn't know what was happening yet, but she knew one thing with aching certainty. Something was alive under the earth. And her dog, her grieving, aging, gentle-hearted Cooper, wasn't going to let it die. 3 days earlier, everything had been still. It was a quiet kind of morning, the kind Evelyn Hart had grown used to in her years living alone on the edge of Flathead National Forest. The peaks in the distance wore their last veil of winter snow, and the early spring sun poured gold over the frost-bitten fields. Her cabin sat tucked into a thicket of pine, with a wraparound porch that creaked when the wind nudged it. It was peaceful, almost holy. She sipped her coffee from the chipped green mug with the elk on the side, the one her husband, Charlie, used every morning before he died. His old flannel shirt hung from her shoulders, soft from 100 washes. It still smelled like pine and wood smoke. She never said that part out loud. Cooper, her aging chocolate lab mix, lay curled on the old quilt by the stove, his snout twitching in some distant dream. He had been quieter lately. Not sluggish exactly, just thoughtful. He'd always been a good dog, obedient, loyal, but in recent weeks, he'd started doing something strange, staring into the woods for long stretches. Silent, ears forward. Like he was listening to something Evelyn couldn't hear. She'd chalked it up to age, or maybe memories. Dogs remember grief too, she believed. That morning, she pulled on her boots and whistled. "Come on, Coop." Let's walk before the sky changes its mind. He rose slowly, stretching, shaking off sleep. They followed the narrow dirt trail that curved behind the cabin and dipped into the woods. Evelyn always took this walk before the phone calls started, before the memories crept in. The air smelled like thawing soil and cedar. Birds were returning. Warblers, jays, even a red-tailed hawk overhead. Nature was waking up, and Evelyn tried to let it fill the hollow spaces inside her. About halfway down the path, Cooper stopped. Just stopped dead. His ears twitched. He sniffed the breeze. Then he growled, low and unsettled. Evelyn froze. "What's that about, buddy?" He didn't move, just stared downhill toward the edge of the gulch where the runoff from the mountain snow collected. She followed his gaze, but saw nothing. Just muddy ridges, exposed roots, melting snow, and a few rocks that looked vaguely displaced. He eventually moved on, but his pace was slower, more alert. That night, the weather changed. It came on fast, not snow, but slush. A freak late-season storm slammed into the mountains from the north. Heavy rain mixed with melting snow caused the hillside to shift in places. Evelyn sat up half the night listening to the creaks of the trees and the hiss of runoff sliding down the ravines. The wind howled like it was grieving something deep in the earth. She woke to silence, not the calm kind, the kind that follows something being rearranged. The trail was impassable the next morning. Branches down, earth collapsed along the gulch line. And Cooper? He was pacing, not panicked, but focused. He kept returning to the same spot near the fence line, nose down, circling, whining. Evelyn watched him from the porch, arms crossed against the cold. Something tugged at her, a sense she hadn't felt in years. The same one she used to feel in the ER right before a call came in. A stillness just before something broke open. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Cooper stopped pacing. He looked at her, then walked down to the edge of the gulch and lay down, facing the slope, waiting. She would later realize that was the first signal. The first moment he tried to tell her, "There's something under there, and it doesn't have much time." By midday, the sun broke through the overcast sky, glinting off puddles and patches of exposed stone. Evelyn pulled on her gloves and zipped up her jacket. She hadn't planned to go down into the gulch. She was too old for mudslides and sprained ankles. But Cooper had other plans. He stood by the trailhead again, tail stiff, head pointed like an arrow. When she didn't follow right away, he barked once, sharp and urgent. It wasn't like him. Cooper never barked without reason. All right, she muttered, grabbing her walking stick from beside the porch. "Lead the way, boss." The descent was slow. The recent storm had turned the soil to slush, and the narrow footpath along the slope had all but eroded. Cooper didn't wait. He charged ahead, sliding, digging his paws in for traction. Evelyn picked her way carefully down the incline, muttering every prayer she could remember to avoid a fall. When she reached the bottom, she found him standing still, frozen like a statue, at the base of a twisted alder tree. His nose hovered just above the ground. His whole body trembled. Then, without warning, he dropped his head and started digging. Not like a playful dog, not even like a dog who'd scented prey. No, this was something else. Urgent, furious, determined. The mud flew in wet arcs behind him. "Cooper!" Evelyn cried, stumbling forward. "Stop it! You're gonna hurt your paws." He didn't even turn his head. His nails clawed deeper. His chest heaved with the effort. Then he let out a low whine, one of those sounds that goes straight through a person's ribs. Evelyn rushed to his side and dropped to her knees, nearly losing her balance on the slick ground. That's when she saw it. A patch of fur, not soil, not rock. Fur. Tangled, wet, and motionless. She reached in with shaking hands and pulled away handfuls of earth. Her breath caught. It was a kitten. At least it looked like one. But its face, the pointed ears, the dark spotting across the coat. "This isn't a house cat," she breathed. She cleared more mud. Its body was limp, unmoving. She touched it. It was so cold, so terribly cold. Then, a flicker, a breath, tiny, shallow. "You're alive," she whispered. "Oh, my Lord, you're alive." Cooper backed up a step and watched her. His body quivered, not with fear, but something deeper. Urgency, anticipation. And then he turned and began digging again, just 3 feet to the right. "Coop! Wait. What are you doing now?" He growled softly, like he was answering a question she hadn't asked. Evelyn tucked the tiny creature into her coat, right against her chest, and crawled over to the second site. The mud was heavier here, soaked through from runoff. Cooper dug faster, spraying dirt across her boots. His paws struck something soft. Evelyn dropped her stick and started digging with him, her gloved hands clawing at the wet earth. Her breath came in gasps. Her knees sank into the mud. Time folded in on itself. Finally, her fingers closed around something solid. She pulled. A second bobcat kitten, larger than the first, but its head lolled sideways, eyes closed, mud crusted along its muzzle. It didn't move. Evelyn pressed her fingers to its side. For one long second, nothing. Then, one breath. Then another, shallow, but real. She sat back hard in the mud, both kittens now cradled against her chest. Her heart thundered, tears burned at the corners of her eyes. Cooper let out a soft whine and pressed his head against her arm. "I don't know how you knew," she whispered. "But you did." Above them, the wind shifted. A hawk cried in the distance. Evelyn looked at the sky, then down at the fragile lives in her hands. She didn't know what to do, but she knew she couldn't leave them here. Evelyn didn't remember getting back to the cabin. Her boots tracked mud across the porch, through the kitchen, and down the hallway to the back room, where the old wood stove still gave off faint heat. She moved on instinct. That part of her that had once worked 12-hour ER shifts kicked in. No panic, just motion. Steady, efficient, afraid to feel. The kittens were wrapped in 2 layers of towels, placed inside a cardboard box she'd lined with fleece, and set on top of a gently warmed heating pad. She adjusted it every few minutes to avoid overheating. Cooper sat nearby, watching. Not once did he leave the room. She tried to call her neighbor Martha, but the signal kept cutting out. The storm must have knocked something out. So she flipped through the old yellow phone book that hadn't been touched in years until she found a listing. Pine Hollow Wildlife Haven. They were across the county line, an hour's drive if the roads weren't washed out. She called. A calm voice answered. Female, young. "Hi, this is Kara, Wildlife Rehabilitation Intake." Evelyn's voice cracked. She hadn't cried during the digging, not when she'd found the second kitten nearly lifeless. But now, just speaking the words, her throat closed. "I found 2 bobcat kittens. My dog found them. They're barely breathing. They were under the mud. I think the storm collapsed something." There was a pause. Then Kara said, "Okay, you're doing the right thing. First, don't feed them. Nothing. No milk, no water. Just keep them warm and quiet. Do you have a box with towels?" "Yes." "Good. Can you bring them in?" Evelyn looked out the window at the battered dirt road winding through the trees. "I'll get there," she said. "However I have to." She loaded the kittens into the passenger seat, the box cushioned with pillows on every side. Cooper jumped into the back of the truck without needing to be told. He sat facing the box the entire ride. The road was worse than she feared. Washouts, fallen branches, ruts deep enough to rattle her bones. Every bump made her flinch, thinking of the fragile weight resting beside her. They arrived at Pine Hollow just before dusk. The facility looked small, low wood buildings, a wire gate, a faded sign. But the people waiting outside moved with purpose. Kara met her at the door, early 30s, short hair, weathered boots, hands that looked like they knew how to save lives. "You must be Evelyn. Let's get them inside." The exam room was warm, softly lit. No harsh fluorescent buzz, just a quiet hum. Kara and 2 others moved quickly. One kitten was placed under a heat lamp, her tiny body so still it made Evelyn's chest ache. "This one's critical," Kara murmured. 3 weeks old, maybe less, female, severely hypothermic. She checked vitals, heart rate, gums, reflexes. Evelyn watched, unable to look away. "The second's a bit older," Kara continued. "Maybe 4 weeks. Better condition, but not by much. They're both malnourished, dehydrated. But they're here, that counts." Evelyn stood in the corner, hands clenched. Cooper sat at the door, eyes on the table. Still, silent. "How did you find them?" one of the techs asked. "My dog," Evelyn said, her voice raw. "He wouldn't stop digging. He just knew." Kara looked up from her stethoscope. "He's a hero. Most dogs wouldn't have sensed anything, especially through that much mud. And most people wouldn't have stopped to look." Evelyn glanced down at her mud-streaked jeans. Her hands still shook. "I didn't do anything special," she whispered. "I just listened to him." "That's the difference," Kara said. "You listened." The smaller kitten gave a weak twitch under the heat lamp. Evelyn's breath caught. Kara smiled softly. "Still fighting." She turned to Evelyn. "You've done everything right. Go home. Rest. We have your contact info. We'll call with updates." Evelyn hesitated. Her eyes locked on the tiny, fragile creatures lying in their towel nests. "I'll come back," she said. If they make it." Kara nodded. "If they make it, we'll make sure they know who helped save them." Cooper gave a low woof, almost like punctuation. Kara looked down at him. "Especially him," she added. "He's not just a dog. He's something else entirely." Evelyn didn't know what that meant then, but she would. The next 10 days blurred together in a rhythm of waiting and worrying. Evelyn called Pine Hollow Wildlife Haven every morning, sometimes again before bed. Each time she braced herself for the worst. She couldn't explain why 2 wild animals had burrowed so deep into her heart, but they had. Maybe it was because Cooper had found them. Maybe it was because they were so impossibly small. Or maybe it was something quieter, something she couldn't name. Kara answered most of the calls. Her voice was calm, but honest. "They're holding on," she said the first few days. "The little one, we've named her Juniper. She's still struggling. The bigger one, we're calling Ash, is slightly stronger, but it's still touch and go." Evelyn repeated their names like a prayer. Juniper and Ash. Tiny echoes of the woods where they were born, where they almost died. She sat at the kitchen table, the box still on the floor even though it was empty now. Cooper often lay beside it, nose resting against the side like he was keeping vigil. He wouldn't sleep in his usual spot by the stove, wouldn't touch his food some nights. He seemed to feel the pull of those small lives still fighting beyond the trees. Kara began sending updates by text. sometimes with photos. The first one came on day 4. Evelyn opened it with shaking hands. The image was grainy but clear. 2 tiny bobcat kittens curled under a red heat lamp. Juniper was still thin as a breath, but her eyes were cracked open. Ash looked sturdier, her fur starting to fluff out from proper warmth. Juniper's got a respiratory infection, Kara told her on day 6. We've got her on antibiotics. She's feisty, though. She bit me this morning when I tried to clean her paws. That's a good sign. Evelyn laughed, the sound startling even her. Cooper lifted his head. Biting's good, she told him. Means she's got fight. On day 8, Evelyn dreamed of Charlie. He was standing by the back fence, flannel shirt unbuttoned, arms crossed as he watched the gulch. When she reached him, he looked down at her with that half-smile of his. You did good, Ev, he said softly. She woke with her hand on her chest, heart pounding. The next morning, the call came. Kara's voice held something new, something light. They've turned the corner, she said. Evelyn gripped the phone so tightly her fingers ached. Both of them? Both. Juniper's infection is clearing. Ash is gaining weight like a champ. They're starting to hiss at us when we come near. Which, weirdly, is exactly what we want. They remember they're wild, Evelyn whispered. Exactly. That afternoon, another photo arrived. Juniper, eyes wide and clear now, perched on a small platform beside Ash. Their ears alert, their gaze sharp. No longer victims, survivors. Evelyn sat on the porch with Cooper beside her, both staring out toward the gulch where it had all begun. The sky was clear, the first hints of green beginning to bud along the edges of the trees. They're gonna make it, she said quietly. Cooper gave a low chuff, his tail thumping once against the porch boards. Then he laid his head in her lap. Evelyn stroked his ears and looked at the trailhead beyond the fence. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid to hope. Spring unfurled slowly across the valley, like a page turning in a book Evelyn hadn't realized she was still reading. Every few days, Pine Hollow sent updates. Brief texts, sometimes photos, sometimes even a voice memo from Kara, who'd begun to sound less like a wildlife tech and more like a trusted friend. They've moved into the juvenile enclosure now, Kara said one morning. We call it the delinquent room. Ropes, branches, platforms, stuff to climb. Ash is cautious, but clever. Juniper? She's a tiny chaos machine. First to pounce. First to test the boundaries. Keeps us on our toes. Evelyn played the message twice. It was the first time since Charlie died that her house didn't feel quite so empty. She printed one of the photos, a blurry shot of Juniper mid-leap, mouth open in what looked like a snarl, and pinned it to the corkboard above her kitchen sink. Below it, Ash stood back, half in shadow, watching her sister's antics with quiet calculation. That one's gonna be the strategist, Evelyn told Cooper, who lay curled nearby. The others all fire. Together they're trouble. Cooper gave a soft huff, as if to agree. Time passed like river water. Quietly, but never still. Evelyn found herself walking the trail more often. Not always to the gulch. Sometimes just to breathe. Sometimes to remember. The path felt different now. Not haunted, but marked. A place where something had been saved. Maybe more than just the kittens. One evening, Kara called directly. We'd like to move them to the release prep enclosure, she said. It's outdoors, full of natural cover, rocks, logs. We'll start leaving live prey, mice, then rats. See if the instincts kick in. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. You think they're ready? We won't rush it. But if they do well, it could be soon. A soft release site is already picked out. Remote, no roads, plenty of cover. It's a good place. That night, Evelyn stood by the back fence in Charlie's old shirt, looking toward the ridge. She remembered holding Juniper's limp body in the mud, remembered how cold she'd felt, how quiet, and the way Cooper had refused to leave her side. A storm had almost buried those lives, and something older, deeper, had pulled them back up. Weeks later, the final update came. Kara's voice was steadier than usual, but Evelyn could hear the emotion behind her words. "We're releasing them in 2 weeks," she said. "But if you'd like to see them before that, we'd like to invite you and Cooper. From a distance. Through the fence. No interaction. We don't want them imprinting any more than they already have. But we thought maybe you'd want to see them just once." Evelyn stared out the window at the morning sun breaking through the pines. "Yes," she said softly. "We'd like that very much." 3 days later, she and Cooper drove back to Pine Hollow. The weather was gentle, clouds drifting like old stories across the sky. Kara met them by the back gate and walked them past the main buildings. "They're in the far enclosure," she said. "We'll stay quiet. Don't call out, just watch." The gate creaked open. The space beyond looked like a slice of wilderness, logs stacked high, thorny shrubs growing wild, a shallow pool glinting in the corner. At first, Evelyn saw nothing, just the shimmer of air and trees. Then Cooper let out a low, breathy whine. 2 shapes emerged from the brush. Ash stepped into the light first, her body sleek and powerful. Her ears twitched, her muscles tensed. Then Juniper followed, slightly smaller, quicker, scanning the perimeter like she was still half wild and half curious. Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth. They were magnificent. Not pets, not orphans anymore. Predators. They paused when they saw the people beyond the fence. Ash lowered her head, wary. Juniper sniffed the air. Her eyes settled on Cooper, and for a moment, just a blink, her body stilled. She took 1 step forward, then another. Slowly, carefully. Ash followed, more cautious, but curious too. They stopped a few feet from the mesh. Not close, not familiar, but present. Watching. Evelyn didn't speak, didn't move. She just stood there with one hand resting on Cooper's head as the wind stirred around them. And in that silence, something passed between the 4 of them. Dog, woman, wild, and wilder. Recognition, not memory, not names, but something older, something like thanks. The wind stirred the pines as Evelyn and Cooper stood behind the mesh fence, watching 2 wild hearts on the other side. Ash paced first, her shoulders rippling with each step. Juniper crouched low in the brush, eyes fixed, body still. Then she lifted her head and stared directly at Cooper. No movement, no sound, just breath held between them. Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't need to. There was something sacred about the moment, something older than language. Juniper's ears twitched. Then, in a slow, careful gesture, she raised 1 paw, not to strike, not to pounce. She simply placed it against the ground in front of her, almost like a quiet salute. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. It wasn't recognition in the human sense, but it was something. A whisper in the space between instincts. A moment shared. And then, as if a thread had been tugged, Juniper turned and vanished into the underbrush. Ash followed silently, melting back into the dappled shade. Kara stood beside Evelyn, watching with her arms folded lightly across her chest. "They're ready?" she said. Evelyn nodded. not trusting herself to speak. Her hand remained on Cooper's head. He sat tall, eyes still fixed on the place where Juniper had disappeared. "We'll release them just after dawn," Kara continued softly. "The soft release pen opens gradually over a few days. They'll have time to adjust to the new location, scent it, own it. Then they'll be free." "Will you see them again?" Evelyn asked. "Probably not," Kara said, smiling faintly. "And that's the goal. If we see them again, it usually means something went wrong." They walked back slowly, the sun beginning its descent beyond the western peaks. Evelyn watched the shadows stretch across the ground. She remembered the weight of mud-soaked fur, the way the first kitten's ribs barely moved beneath her hands, the cold that seeped into her bones as she'd crouched beside Cooper in the dirt, begging the earth to give them back. She didn't say goodbye when they reached the truck. Instead, she paused by the edge of the lot and looked out toward the wild, toward whatever came next. Kara touched her arm gently. "You saved them," she said. Evelyn shook her head. "Cooper did. I just followed." "You followed when most people wouldn't have. That's enough. That's everything." The drive home was quiet. Evelyn didn't turn on the radio. She didn't speak. Cooper lay across the back seat, his eyes half closed but alert. He didn't curl into sleep like he usually did. He stayed upright the entire ride, ears turning with each sound, like he was still listening to the woods behind them. When they got home, the sky was streaked with lavender and silver. Evelyn stepped out, took a long breath of mountain air, and looked out toward the gulch. New grass had begun to grow where the earth had collapsed. Wildflowers had started to push up through the cracks, life returning where it had nearly ended. Cooper padded over to the edge of the slope and sat. No sound, just the wind. He looked out, quiet and still. And Evelyn stood beside him, both of them wrapped in the hush of twilight, feeling the world tilt gently into something new. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They had witnessed something that didn't need words. The morning of the release was still and pale. Evelyn didn't go to Pine Hollow that day. She stayed home, knowing it wasn't hers to witness. Some things belonged only to the wild. But she rose early, made coffee, slipped on Charlie's flannel shirt without thinking. Cooper sat by the door, tail flicking once, then still, as if he knew too. She walked down the trail past the ridge, past the gnarled alder where the earth had once opened up like a wound. New grass had grown there, wildflowers too. It looked nothing like the place she'd pulled them from. She sat on the old log near the gulch and waited. Birdsong filled the trees. The wind whispered through the pines. Somewhere far away, two young bobcats stepped beyond their final gate into a world that did not know them, did not owe them, did not promise anything, but they were ready. Evelyn closed her eyes. Behind her lids, she saw their small bodies, still and cold, then trembling, then snarling, climbing, running. Cooper pressed his body gently against her leg. Not to ask for anything, just to be there. They sat like that for a long time. Maybe Juniper and Ash would live for years. Maybe they'd vanish into the wild, never seen again. Maybe one day, someone would glimpse a shadow on a ridge and wonder if it had always been there. It didn't matter. They were wild now. They belonged to no one. Evelyn stood. She reached down, ruffled Cooper's ears, and whispered, "You did good, old man." He blinked slowly up at her, the way dogs do when they understand more than you think. They turned toward the trail and walked home together. And though no one would ever carve their names into stone or write books about what they did, Evelyn knew the truth of it. A good dog had listened to something deeper. A grieving woman had dared to follow. and two small creatures, buried and forgotten by the world, had clawed their way back into the light. Sometimes, she thought, the most extraordinary stories begin with no witnesses, no plan, just instinct and love and the refusal to walk away. Somewhere in the mountains, a bobcat cried. And in the quiet that followed, Evelyn smiled.